Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Okay, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's show. Today we're going back to metabolism. And, it's a good time to do it because it's early spring. People are kind of always wanting to kind of see how they can take their fitness and body to the next level, body composition. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about body recompositioning. So you might say, well, what is that, Jade? Basically what that is how do we, at all ages and all levels and everything else, how do we as individuals try to take ourselves from one body composition to another body composition and do it in a way that is burning fat and hopefully maintaining or perhaps even gaining muscle at the same time. So this is this idea of body recompositioning, meaning that we're basically trying to trade fat for muscle. We're basically trying to burn off the fat and gain the muscle, in a sense. Some people call this feeding the lean, basically meaning that what we want to do is we want to feed our bodies, exercise a lot, put on muscle, and hopefully burn fat in the process. Now, if you are a very frequent listener to this podcast and the metabolism aspects of this podcast, because as you know, we cover mindset and muscle and sort of metabolism. This is kind of falls in the rubric of muscle and metabolism, this show. Especially if you listen to those muscle and metabolism podcasts, you probably have heard of the idea and heard me say that the metabolism is not a great multitasker. And now I'm saying, hey, look, today's topic is going to be on how do we get the body to multitask better. In other words, from the metabolism's point of view, burning fat while building muscle is kind of the metabolic equivalent of rubbing your tummy and tapping your head. It can be done, but it takes practice and a concerted effort and detailed attention. The major way that we do that is very well thought out, actually, and very well proven, actually. And it's proven in several ways. We do have a research base that says this is possible and hints at what we need to be doing if we want to burn fat and maintain or even gain muscle at the same time. But more importantly, we have a huge base of clinical practice in the world of natural bodybuilding. Bodybuilders have been doing this for generations now, right? Like going all the way back to Arnold and, maybe the generation before. So it's like one full generation of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are physique athletes, meaning people who are using their bodies almost as like a living flesh sculpture to burn fat off the body while gaining muscle. This is the realm of bodybuilding, and we have a lot of people, thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people, if not millions of people who have gone through this process. And we have a good research base here. So there is a way to do this, and it is pretty well known and pretty well thought out and pretty simple when you discuss it in a format like this. Now, of course, it's incredibly difficult once you get down to actually doing it. And I'm just going to come out and tell you right now what the 2 major components are. When we think about body recompositioning, when we think about metabolic multitasking, burning fat and building muscle at the same time, we basically begin to think about trading resistance training in place, or putting resistance training in place of cardiovascular exercise as the dominant form of exercise, and also trading up protein as the dominant macronutrient while also reducing fat, and then playing around with the Goldilocks point with carbs. But in a very real sense, this is really about resistance training and protein intake. That's what it's about, resistance training and protein intake. Now, this is at a high level, it's like, okay, so Jade, what you're telling me to do is you're telling me eat more protein and do more resistance training. And that's exactly right. But of course, we want to get into more of the details here because there's an awful lot of thought and controversy around, well, what should we be doing with our resistance training? Because there are many different types of resistance training, right? There is, sort of the traditional sort of powerlifting stuff, trying to get strong. This is stuff that stays in the repetition range of maybe, 1 rep all the way up to 6 reps, right? In this sort of 1 to 6 rep, maybe 8 rep range. So it's relatively heavy weights in lower repetitions with longer rest periods. This is what we typically think about when we're trying to get stronger. And then of course, there's this idea of, okay, well, what about these people who just want to focus on building muscle? Because what a lot of people don't know who aren't students of this industry and aren't students of resistance training is that the two are somewhat related, but not exactly related. In other words, if you build bigger muscles, there is some crossover that you might get stronger. However, really hypertrophy, the growth of muscles, is different than getting strong. And there is a particular way to train for that that typically resides in higher repetition ranges, maybe from 8 all the way up to 30 in a set. And you might say, oh my God, Jade, what are you talking about here? Like, why the huge repetition range? We'll get into this a little bit here in a minute in terms of how to build muscle with workouts. But we also have these other workouts that I talk about a lot called metabolic conditioning, which have to do with very short rest periods, what we call lifting weights faster, not faster in terms of the speed at which you're doing the repetitions, but faster meaning less rest between sets. And one of the first rules you have to understand here, which we'll get into in a minute, is that the shorter the rest period you take, the more you interfere with hypertrophy. Now, obviously, meaning the more you interfere with gaining muscle. Now, it doesn't mean you won't gain muscle. It just means you're not doing the most efficient type of exercise to gain muscle. Likewise, if you're doing very low repetition, less than 6 reps, let's say, of very high weights with very sort of long rest periods, you are also potentially interfering with hypertrophy. So when we're talking about muscle growth, we're talking about this sweet spot sort of here in the middle where the weights are heavy enough but not too heavy, and the rest periods are enough but not too short or too long. So there's kind of this sweet spot we have to talk about here when we're trying to do body recompositioning. Basically burning fat and building muscle. Now, of course, the first rule, and one rule we oftentimes talk about that may be new to some of you here, is that ultimately when you talk about fat burning and losing fat, this is really mostly about diet. However, when you talk about turning this weight loss into fat loss and holding on to muscle or gaining muscle, we're talking mostly about resistance training. And so again, this is really a diet and exercise type of thing. Now, we've talked about different metabolic toggles that I'll go through really quickly here, just in case people have not heard this concept. There are many different ways to look at this, right? There's the eat less, exercise more toggle, which creates a large calorie gap to create a calorie deficit for weight loss and hopefully fat loss, but for weight loss, eat less, exercise more. One of the things you need to understand about that is that with eat less, exercise more, you are going to create a calorie deficit. And if you have a calorie deficit, you don't necessarily have the energy to build muscle. So just as weight loss requires a calorie deficit for most people and in most situations, so too does muscle gain require calorie excess. So eat less, exercise more probably is not going to be the best toggle to use if we're trying to multitask, if we're trying to do body recompositioning, if we're trying to gain muscle and burn fat at the same time. We also have the eat more, exercise less toggle, which is really about what? This is really about the couch potato model. This is pretty good at giving us extra fuel to burn or to build muscle and fat. But with all those extra calories, you're probably going to put on way too much fat. So that leaves us with two more toggles that you all who are regulars of this podcast are used to hearing about. That is the eat less, exercise less toggle, which is what I call sort of the traditional hunter-gatherer toggle or the historical European toggle. It's all about walking a whole lot, not eating that much. And so you're not exercising a whole lot, so you're not that hungry, but you're not doing a lot of crazy exercise. You're not running marathons. You're not doing bodybuilding workouts. You're not doing excessive, strenuous exercise. You're just walking a ton and doing some, resistance training, maybe 1 to 3 workouts a week, but mainly walking and eating very little, or eating in, sort of a low calorie state. And because you're not exercising so much with eat less, exercise less, it's easier to stay in that low calorie state. Now, again, that's probably not going to be the best toggle if we need fuel to fuel high amounts of longer duration, longer intensity, and more frequent exercise, is it? So probably the toggle we want to be thinking about is the eat more, exercise more toggle. This means we're going to exercise more and we're going to ramp up our food intake to balance out that exercise and increase sort of this idea of energy flux, a lot of energy coming in, but also a lot of energy going out. And hopefully, if we can get our macronutrient ratios correct with more protein, get the carbohydrates balanced, and a lower fat diet typically is how this works, you're going to be able to do some of this multitasking. So let's go through this in detail. You want to burn fat and you want to gain some muscle. Now, this is difficult to do, so let's get a couple things out of the way. If you are a beginner and you're listening to this and you do what I tell you, you're probably going to have a pretty easy time compared to someone like me and the rest of us who have been doing this for a very long time. And, the reason being is that you're a beginner, you're a novice, and so you will respond to exercise more favorably. Your muscles will have more adaptation potential, perhaps, than mine would, having been a lifter for, since I was 15 now. So what is that? I'm now 50 years old, close to 50. So that is a very long time for me to be training, right? It's 30 years basically of me training, 30 plus years of training. Sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low-carb protein in your pocket. They also, these Paleo Valley beef sticks, are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted. And raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. PaleoValley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show. And so from that perspective, this is going to be easier for you. Now, if we're taking anabolic steroids as well, then that's going to make it sort of a little bit better as well because of that same adaptation principle. One of the things that anabolic steroids does is help us adapt, right? It helps us adapt and get, better faster with these extra hormones in our system that aid with muscle protein synthesis and aid with fat burning. That's what things like testosterone and anabolic and analogs of testosterone do. They simultaneously help us burn fat and increase muscle protein synthesis so we gain muscle. And so those who are on anabolic steroids can do this well. Now, for the rest of us who are natural athletes, now I am on testosterone replacement therapy, which is different than anabolic steroid use or high testosterone use. I'm basically just replacing normal amounts. So for those of you who are like me, still going to be relatively more difficult because your testosterone isn't at super physiological levels. It's just simply keeping you in the normal range. So for the rest of us who are not beginners and are not taking anabolic steroids, this is going to be much more difficult to do. Now, for those of you who are taking anabolics and those of you who are beginners, it's going to be much more easy to do. So let's break this down pretty quickly. And this should not be too long of a podcast, but it should be a really important one for you. First, let's talk about diet. Okay. So the three major macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Now, two of those macronutrients, fat and carbs, are primarily prioritized. One sec, I got my alarm going off. Let me just stop that. Okay. So fat and carbohydrates, right, are primarily prioritized by the body for energy use. Now, protein is more like a flex fuel. It certainly can be used to make glucose, some of the gluconeogenic amino acids, or make ketones, some of the ketogenic amino acids. But it is primarily and preferably used for body infrastructure, right? It wants to be used for collagen, for ligaments, for tendons, for muscle growth, for enzymes and cofactors and all of that kind of stuff. And so when the body is looking at these three fuel sources, it's essentially saying, look, I don't want to use my protein if possible because I need it to repair and recover, and I need it to make the things that are going to be required to help me perform and exercise and adapt. And so right there, that tells you that protein is going to become your primary macronutrient. And when I say primary macronutrient, I don't necessarily mean that this is going to be the dominant macronutrient in your macronutrient ratios, but it should be the dominant macronutrient that you're paying most attention to. That's what I mean here. And right off the bat, we do have really good research, especially good research in the last 5 to 10 years here, telling us basically what we should know here. Now we know conclusively that not only are higher protein diets going to be better for this, but they're also incredibly safe for all of us, except for people who have existing liver and kidney disease. Everyone else, higher protein diets not only are healthy, are good for us, but can actually be extra healthy and extra longevity inducing for us. In other words, help us age better, partly because of how they replace lots of our proteins. Now, one thing to say here is that for those people who are vegans and vegetarians, you might hear a lot of argument about this idea of you don't need a whole lot of protein. If you want to do body recompositioning and you want to do it well, you're going to have to change your views on that. One of the things that you got to look at when we're talking about the protein as a macronutrient is you have to kind of understand that nobody in the modern day eating just a general diet, vegan, vegetarian, very few people are going to become protein deficient. That does not mean, however, that you're going to have adequate protein to put on the amount of muscle you might want to put on or maintain muscle in a body recompositioning program, right? Those are two different things, keeping you from becoming protein deficient versus having adequate protein levels. So I'm just going to go strictly by the research here. And so for those of you who are vegans, vegetarians, and are worried about these, sort of numbers, these are evidence-based numbers that are basically looking at what is required without looking at whether you're a meat eater, vegan or vegetarian or anything like that, to most enhance muscle protein synthesis and deal with some of the issues around excess hunger and overeating that can cause us to eat too much and gain fat, which we don't want to do if we're trying to body recomposition, and the research around this. And so I'll talk a little bit about how vegans and vegetarians can get these numbers, because right away when you hear these numbers, you may begin to say, okay, this is excessive from the point of view of trying to do this as a vegan or vegetarian. And truth is, it's actually pretty easy as a vegetarian. It's not as easy as a vegan, but it can be done once you start using protein replacement supplements and things like that, protein shakes and things of that nature. So first, let's start with the protein. The way that you'll want to do this is twofold. You want to consume in grams of protein daily the amount that you want to weigh or the amount that you currently weigh in grams. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. Typically, the amount most of us want to weigh is going to be close to our fat-free mass. Basically, our muscle mass plus our organ tissues plus body water plus glycogen and all of that kind of stuff. So I know my fat-free mass, and you can calculate your fat-free mass by taking your body weight, right? So I'm 225 pounds times your body fat. I'm about 14% body fat. And I can take my 13% basically times 225 and get my fat-free mass. Now, in general, right, if I say, hey, look, I would like to weigh 200 pounds because I'm 225, then I want to essentially consume my fat-free mass or the amount that I want to weigh in grams of protein per day up to the amount I do weigh. So for me, I don't really want to be below 200 pounds. My fat-free mass, by the way, is what? Let's do that calculation really quickly, just so those of you who don't know how to do the calculation. So I'm 13% body fat. I'm 225 pounds times 0.13 equals 29.25, right? And then minus that by 225. So basically, my lean body mass is close to 195 pounds, right? So that's a lot for fat-free mass. So I'm about right in terms of what I wouldn't want to go below 200 pounds. But the point is you want to set your protein grams to that range. So 225 pounds or 225 grams of protein daily equals my pounds in body weight. No less than 200 grams of protein per day. So for me, I would be consuming 200 grams to 225 grams of protein per day at a minimum. Now you might say, well, Jade, can I go higher than that? You certainly can, although it may not be beneficial. And remember, we're walking this fine line. Protein can be stored as fat. It's just much more difficult to store it as fat. So we're walking this fine line where we're basically creating this very, sort of isocaloric to hypocaloric sort of state, right? In other words, we're bouncing around in this range where some days we're probably going to be slightly over, some days we're going to be slightly under, some days we're going to be more isocaloric. Because overall, what we're trying to do is trade fat for muscle, trade muscle for fat. So replace fat with muscle. This is what we're trying to do. Now, there's several different ways to do this. One way that some people do is they'll take the off season, if they're a bodybuilder, and they'll gain a bunch of weight and try to gain their muscle. Then they'll try to strip off the fat. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about trying to do both at the same time. So what that means is you're going to have a very narrow calorie gap, right? You're going to be playing in that gap. And we can do that by having more protein in our diets as a total amount. Now, what I like to do with this is I like to set my macronutrients for myself at 40, 30, 30. And I like to basically calculate this based on the amount of protein grams I'm going to shoot for per day. So if I'm going to be consuming 225 grams of protein daily, and that's 30% of my total calories, right? And so we'll do this calculation together here and see if you can follow me as we go along. So I'm 225 pounds, and I know that I'm going to essentially be taking 30%, that is 30% of my total calories, right? And I know that there's 4 calories per gram of protein, right? So I can say 225, that would be grams of protein, times 4, right? Times 0.30, right? Is that right? Let's see, 225 times 4 divided by 0.30, right? Okay, so that's how we do it because we have to cross multiply. So 225 is my body weight. There's 4 calories per gram of protein. So 225 grams of protein is what I'm eating. So we multiply that times 4. That means 900, right, calories I will be consuming as protein. Now, what is 900 calories 30% of? So we have to cross multiply, divided by 0.30. And that gives me a calorie count of 3,000 on this recompositioning diet. And then from there, I can essentially say, okay, well, that gives me my protein, right? That gives me my total calories, but my carbs are going to be 40%. So times 0.40, right? That's 1,200 calories of carbs. And there's 4 calories per gram of carb. So that'll be 300 grams of carbohydrates per day. So now that means I got 300 grams of carbs, 225 grams of protein. Now let's figure out the fat. Right, so the fat is also 30%, so that'll be 900 calories, right? So we know that 3,000 calories times 0.30, right? It's not another 900 calories, but this time there are 9 calories per gram of fat, right? So that's 100 grams of fat. So that's how I would begin my initial calculation. 225 grams of protein, 300 grams of carbohydrate, and 100 grams of fat would be my initial 3,000 calories. And you can do this yourself once you decide the amount of protein you're going to be taking in. So you see how protein becomes the most important macronutrient in this recompositioning diet, right? So a 40-30-30 diet, 40% carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat. Now, if you wanted to, you could ramp up your protein even more or ramp up your carbs even more, but you probably want to leave your fat 30% or less, and that's because the fat commands such a high amount of calories. And so what you want to be doing here, and by the way, for some of you who are used to this is easy math and you're used to counting macros and doing all this. For those of you who aren't, let me give you a shortcut here when you're doing this. You don't have to worry about much at all, and you actually don't even have to do that calculation if you just start with your protein grams. For example, if you just go, I'm going to get in my body weight in grams of protein per day, then I'm going to eat basically how I feel like I want to eat, and then I'm going to wait 3 days, and then I'm going to write down and weigh everything I'm eating and back calculate and just say, okay, when I get my 225 grams of protein, am I getting the amount of calories that I need? What's the amount of calories I'm getting? And what is the result that I'm getting? So you can do this in a little bit more intuitive way. And by the way, that's the way I would do this. And I do this. I essentially just go, look, I'm going to consume 225 grams of protein. I'm going to ramp up my exercise, which we'll talk about here in a minute. I'm going to minimize my fat intake, and I'm going to make sure I get enough but not too much carbs. So when you think about the macronutrients, think about carbs, not too much, not too little, but just right. Think about this exact amount of protein, and think about de-emphasizing fat. And the reason we want to de-emphasize fat is because that is what's going to ramp up a lot of the calories, and we want our body to burn off that fat. And we know that when we're going to be doing lots of intense exercise, carbohydrates are a better fuel for that. So this really is very different than what a lot of people think. Keto is not going to work as well here. Intermittent fasting probably won't work as well here, although some people do use it, and I'll talk a little bit about how to use it. But the best way to do this is going to be to fuel the body with carbs, use those carbs to get very intense workouts, get plenty of protein on board to help you repair the damage that you've done and increase muscle protein synthesis, and keep the calories down by de-emphasizing your fat intake. This is the way that it's done, and it can be very simply done simply by prioritizing protein. Now, if you're in Europe, because I know I have a lot of listeners who think in terms of kilograms, make sure if you're going to use this, make sure you convert your weight into pounds. This should be grams of protein per pound of body weight, or grams of protein per lean body mass or fat-free mass. Usually your fat-free mass is going to kind of be like where you would want to weigh and what you would weigh if you were looking sort of your best. That would be an extremely lean body. So this is the way you want to do this. Also, one of the things you want to think about with muscle protein synthesis and building muscle is that the more feeding opportunities, the better. What the research actually shows us is that if you consume all of your protein at one meal, let's say you're an intermittent faster. Now, of course, there is a prioritization here. The total amount of protein matters most. However, right after that is the total amount and frequency of eating. In other words, research has shown, not all research, but enough to make us kind of give some general ideas that 4 feeding opportunities is better than 3, is better than 2, is better than 1. And so, yes, first and foremost, prioritize the amount of protein. That's most important. Just to repeat that really quickly, you're going to want to, based on the research, have 4 feeding opportunities with protein, right? This is going to be the way. So that means 4 meals, or at least 4 times that you're taking in protein. You don't have to be like the full meal, but you should be having protein at those times. At least 4 of these feeding opportunities. And this is very different than what a lot of us think about, especially as of late when we're thinking about intermittent fasting and keto and all of this kind of stuff. Think of those as more fat burning protocols. Think of what I'm telling you now as more muscle building along with fat burning. It's the protein that allows us to be a better multitasker in the same way the exercise allows us to be a better multitasker. I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that low sodium, too low sodium, is an issue? Just as much, if not more so, than high sodium. In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who's been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product Element comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low-carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where Element comes in. Element is a new sponsor to the Next Level Human podcast. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using Element have been telling me, that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. Please check out Element. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. DrinkElement.com. That's DrinkLMNT.com. DrinkElement.com, and let's get back to the show. So let's just repeat what we've got for protein right now. You're going to consume somewhere between your body weight in pounds in grams of protein. That would be up near the max of what you're going to consume. You don't want to consume any less than your lean body mass in pounds in grams of protein per day. So for me, that's going to be somewhere around 200 grams to 225 grams of protein daily. Now, if I want to, I can certainly calculate my macronutrients at a 40-30-30 macronutrient ratio to start. Some people might say, Jade, I'm going to need a little bit more carbs than that. So they might go 50-30-20. Some people might go 40-40-20. Many bodybuilders who are serious about this, you'll see them try to get their fat down around 20%. I like to keep my fat up a little bit, closer to 30%, but I don't really like to go above that. And then I'm going to be giving myself, or you're going to be giving yourself, 4 feeding opportunities per day, 4 meals per day. I oftentimes call this the 4-2-2 eating protocol. The 4 stands for 4 meals per day. The 2 stands for 2 mixed meals. And the other 2 stands for 2 meals with basically only protein and vegetable. This is another really intuitive way to get this, where it's essentially, hey, I'm doing a 4-2-2 approach. 4 meals, 2 with just vegetables and no carbs or fat, and 2 with carbs or starch and fat. It's another way to think about this 40-30-30 EM protocol that is more calorie-based and math-based. You can do it more intuitive-based using this 4-2-2 protocol. Now, one thing that comes up here is this idea of like, well, Jade, how many grams of protein should I have per meal? Because I've heard things like you really need, you can only absorb 20 grams of protein per day, or you can't take in more than 40 grams of protein per day, or per meal rather. Some of these things that people talk about. And the truth is probably the upper limit for most people in terms of the muscle protein synthesis, the ability for us to digest, absorb, and assimilate, and ramp up muscle protein synthesis looks like, in some of the research, is probably around 40 to 45 grams. However, so you can kind of think about that's sort of the upper limit. However, that does not mean we should not and cannot get more. As a matter of fact, this is going to, you can absorb as much as you eat. It's just whether or not it's going to be utilized for muscle protein synthesis. And think about the other aspect of what we're doing with this idea of multitasking. One of the problems people get into is they try to diet and they want to burn fat or build muscle or whatever, and their hunger becomes a mitigating factor. A factor that keeps them from being able to do what they want, because they start out trying to follow this 4-2-2 protocol or this 40-30-30 protocol or whatever it is. But then they get so hungry or they have cravings that they can't do it, and they end up over consuming fat and starch. And so the other thing that protein does, and the reason you want to air higher if you're having cravings. So what I'm telling you is actually, if you're having hunger and cravings, it's not just about muscle protein synthesis versus muscle protein breakdown. It's also about keeping hunger and cravings in check. And some people need to go even higher than those protein amounts. And research has actually shown that can not only be safe, but going up even higher can have even more beneficial effects in this multitasking aspect of things, and is also completely safe. So in other words, they've actually shown going as high as 1.5 and maybe even up to, if 225 for me, maybe even up to 300 grams of protein per day based on the output that I'm putting in. Now, is all of that going to go to muscle protein synthesis? No. It's far less likely to go to fat than starch and fat as macronutrients, though, and it may do enough to shut down my hunger so I'm not overeating in general. And this is the idea here. So there's two things we're talking about when we're talking about the amount of protein that you can use for muscle protein synthesis versus the amount of protein that might be required also to shut down hunger and cravings. So hopefully that's making sense. So protein is the priority here. Eat, I would recommend up to your body weight in grams of protein per day, or if you're very lean, very small, or very big. If you're very obese or very small, then maybe you want to go lean body mass or adjust that up or down. If you're very lean or small, you might want to go up a little bit more. If you're very heavy, you might want to go down a little bit more from that. I think very overweight individuals above 30% body fat, you're probably best using your lean body mass as your gauge for the amount of protein that you take in. For example, we wouldn't want a 350 pound person to be necessarily consuming 350 grams of protein daily. But let's say their lean body mass is 200, that might be where we want them to be. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the first aspect of the multitasking protocol. Very simple, actually. I think I probably made it a little bit more complex than it needed to be, but I wanted to have a full discussion here. But one final time here, for the third time, it's as simple as maximize protein intake. That is as simple as what you want to do. Maximize and prioritize protein intake. One thing I'll say about this, by the way, too, is that when you're eating this much protein, one of the things that happens is many people feel like they just can't get it all in because protein is so satiating for some people. So for many people, it becomes a limiting factor because they just lose their appetite. And so in a very real sense, multitasking in this way, body recompositioning, can be very tough, just like dieting. So some people are like, oh, this is great. I can eat all this stuff. But the truth of the matter is, when you're trying to take in 225 grams of lean protein, you're talking about bison, egg whites, chicken breast, very lean protein sources, because you have to have these lean protein sources. Otherwise, a lot of protein comes along with a lot of fat. And you'll see very quickly, if you start getting serious about this, is that most of your protein has to come from lean protein sources. And so you will find yourself not being very hungry, and this can be difficult for many people. Now, for the vegans and vegetarians, just briefly, there are plenty of plant-based protein powders. Soy, not necessarily my favorite, but it might be yours. Soy protein powders, hemp protein powders, pea-based protein powders, rice-based protein powders. Now, if you're a vegetarian, obviously whey and casein and those things are fantastic and usually the best tasting. But if you're a vegan, you can use these other protein sources. The other thing with vegans is you're going to have to rely more heavily on these protein shakes and protein powders and things like that. And one hint that I'll give you here is, whenever you ramp up, this goes for vegetables too, whenever people go on diets and they start to ramp up their protein intake and they ramp up their insoluble fiber intake, they can oftentimes get gas and bloating. So those of you who have sensitive GI systems, rule one, bring your protein and vegetable intake up slowly. Rule 2, maybe add some digestive enzymes to alleviate some of the gastrointestinal discomfort that can come with ramping this stuff up. If you do it slowly, it typically won't bother you too much, and certainly the digestive enzymes can come in handy there. So that's all I'll say on the diet component. That's going to be the way you do your diet. And I like to just apply some general rules here. Now we're basically going to go into the exercise component, and this is where we're really going to start to utilize some of the extra carbohydrates. So some people might say, well, Jade, why are you having 40% starch, even up to 50% starch, 300 grams of starch in your diet, carbohydrates as total grams? Part of the reason is insulin. The same reason people are afraid of carbohydrates is the same reason we want them. Insulin is a muscle building hormone. And it is arguably, I would say, it is the most anabolic hormone in the body, because without insulin, you can't get food into the cell. So it has to be the most anabolic hormone in the body. And when you're using insulin in the context of a lot of resistance training and not a whole lot of calories, just on that edge of calorie excess to gain muscle but not fat, it's going to be a really beneficial hormone. So you want the starch in that Goldilocks zone. So let's talk about now the exercise component, then we can end this particular podcast for today. The exercise component needs to be resistance training dominant. And there's 3 aspects to build muscle that we know of in terms of what the research says. Primarily, they are the following. It is about time under tension, the amount of stress and strain that is on the muscle. So this can come from, yes, 1 repetition at a heavy weight, or on the 11th repetition, you're starting to feel stress and strain through the body. So muscle tension is one. Muscle damage is the other. One of the things that happens when you are really pushing your muscles is you'll oftentimes get these muscle molecules, these signaling molecules that muscle releases, called myokines, things like IL-15, IL-6, IL-8, nitric oxide, lactate. A lot of lactic acid is also something that is released from the muscle. A lot of people think that causes a burn in the muscle. It does not, actually. It buffers against the burn. It also acts as a signaling molecule for human growth hormone. So the more you push the muscles, sort of this metabolic strain, so we want mechanical strain and we want metabolic strain, we want both of those, the more you'll feel a pump and a burn in your muscles. So you know you're getting it when you feel your muscles getting pumped up and swollen, and that you're getting a burn in your muscles as well. So I oftentimes like to talk about the B's and the H's: breathless, burning, heavy, and heat. When we're talking about gaining muscle, it's really about the burning and the heavy component, because the heavy component is about the mechanical strain on the muscle, and the burning component is really about, and the pump, which comes along with the burn, is really about the metabolic strain on the muscle. And of course, when we're talking about gaining muscle, it's really about the total volume of work that the muscle does. So we really want to be thinking about mechanical strain, total volume of work, and metabolic strain as well. Now, there are interesting studies on this, because it has actually been shown that despite what people think, there are many ways to skin this cat of muscle building. Some people do really well in sort of the old-fashioned sort of bodybuilding range of the 10 rep max, 3 to 5 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions, with nearing failure towards the end of those repetitions. However, it's also been shown that very high reps, up near 30, can also stimulate muscle growth. And it's also been shown in research that, and this is an interesting a set of studies that was done, that basically took different groups of people and looked at the hormonal responses, testosterone in particular, to different resistance training protocols. For example, it might be, you take one group and you say, we're going to put you in the 3 to 5 sets of 8 to 12 repetition group. And then we're going to measure your testosterone and human growth hormone responses to that. And we're going to take another group and we're going to put them in a high repetition group, and we're going to measure their responses. And then we're going to switch groups. So everyone goes through both groups and gets their responses measured. And what you'll see is that certain people get more testosterone and human growth hormone response from the 8 to 12 reps, 3 to 5 sets protocol, versus other people get more testosterone and human growth hormone responses from the higher repetition, group or protocol. And then what the researchers did, and I forget this researcher's name, but they basically then said, all right, we're going to take and now do a separate study where we're going to take the people who had the biggest responses to testosterone and human growth hormone in whatever protocol, and we're going to assign them to that protocol. And they actually saw those people get the most gains by being assigned to the protocol that elicited the greatest testosterone and human growth hormone effects in those individuals. And so that line of research tells us there probably is an individual response here. So in a sense, you can do high repetitions or you can do more lower repetitions. You can be in the 3 to 5 sets of 8 to 12 rep sort of group if you want, and especially if you feel like you get a lot from that, or you can be in the high repetition group. If you want to get the best of both worlds, which is what I love to do, is I like to do something along the lines of you basically do 3 to 5 sets of every exercise that you're going to do in the 8 to 12 rep range, that sort of 10 rep max range. If you can't get 8, you're probably going too heavy. If you're getting more than 12, then you're going too light. And then do a 6th set, which is a failure set. So you would do that set to failure or a drop set. For example, it looks something like this. Let's say we're doing bench press, okay? And let's say my working sets on bench would be 225, right? So on bench press, I do set 1, I do 225, and I get 13 reps on 225 pounds on bench press. So then I might want to go up a little bit to 275. And let's say at 275, I get 10 reps, 9 reps. And then my third set, I get another 8 reps, right? And then my fourth set, I get 8 reps. And then my fifth set, I get 8 reps, okay? So I've done my 5 sets of 8 to 12 reps with 225 pounds. Now what I'm going to do is strip the weight off the bar, and I'm going to go down to, let's say, 155 or 135, right? And I'm going to strip a 45-pound plate off the bar, and I'm going to rep that out for as many reps as I can do to failure. Then I'm going to rack it, right? Count the amount of seconds of reps that I got, and then go again. So for example, if I finish my 5th set and I strip the weight off and I rep out 135, let's say I get 135 20 times. Then I'm going to count 20 seconds in my head, and then I'm going to go again, as many reps as I can get on 135. And let's say now I get 17 reps. Then I'm going to count 17 seconds, and I'm going to go again, and maybe I get 10 reps. And I'm going to do that 3 times for sort of this drop time set that is basically a finisher. So you're basically going from these heavy reps with heavier weights, and then you're going this last little finisher, these quick drop sets or these quick sets with lighter weights to burn the muscle out. So you see what we're doing there. We're getting that sort of straining effect, and then we're getting that burning effect. And so that's how you want to be thinking about doing your resistance training. And you can do this for every single movement. This is the way I like to do it. And this assures you're getting both the mechanical strain on the muscle and you're getting that metabolic pump on the muscle as well. And by the way, it doesn't have to be the same exercise exactly, but it should be the same exercise group. So let's say, for example, I'm doing pull-ups and I use bent over rows as the burnout for the back. That's fine when you're doing these burnout sets at the end of your working 8 to 12 rep sets. Just make sure they're the same muscle group. Now, how often should you be training? There's several different ways to do this. Obviously, you're going to want to be training most days of the week, which means 4 to 7 days a week. I think 4 to 6 is a sweet spot, so I like 5 days per week to begin with for most people. And I also like to follow a protocol that's an upper, lower, upper, lower, upper day. So basically, let's say and I'll give you the workout that you can actually follow this workout. So let's say I'm going to split the body into upper and lower body. So my upper day is going to be a vertical press, like a bench press, a horizontal press, like a bench press, a horizontal pull, like a bent over row, a vertical press, like an overhead shoulder press, and a vertical pull, like pull-ups, right? And then I'm going to do, let's say, any exercise for biceps and any exercise for triceps. This gets my whole body. A horizontal push, a horizontal pull, a vertical push, a vertical pull, and then something for biceps and something for triceps. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 movements. Okay. And in each movement, I'm going to do, for the big movements, I'm probably going to do 5 sets of 8 to 12 reps with those 3 drop sets attached. And for the small biceps movements and tricep movement, I'm probably going to do 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps with those 3 set drops. That would be my upper day. On my lower day, I would do squat, let's say, leg press, leg extension, and leg curl, let's say, right? And then, something, you always want to balance out the front of the legs, the posterior and anterior chain. So the back of the legs and the front of the legs. So a squat is kind of hitting both. A leg press is sort of hitting both, but they both lean a little bit more quad dominant, right? So then you put in a leg extension, that's kind of quad dominant too. And then you got a leg curl, that's hamstring dominant. And then you probably want something like a stiff leg deadlift or something like that to balance out the back. So that's 5 movements now: squat, leg press, leg extension, leg curl, and stiff leg deadlift or something like that, right? And then you essentially do the same thing there: 8 to 12 reps, 5 sets for the big muscle groups. And all of those are kind of big muscle groups. And then the 3 drop sets. Then for the week, you go upper Monday, lower Tuesday, upper Wednesday, lower Thursday, right? And then upper again on Friday with Saturday and Sunday off. Then when you start the week again back on Monday, you start with lower. So then it will be lower, upper, lower, right? So you could do it all in a row like that, or you could do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, however you want to do that. But you're going to do most of your days of your week like that. Now think about this. This is a lot of action, a lot of muscles being worked. So for you beginners, you probably don't need all of that. You could probably get away with just 4 days per week or even 3 days per week and still get some of this recompositioning effect. But for those of you who are more advanced like me, that's probably what is going to be required. And that is pretty much it. Now you might say, well, Jade, what about cardio? What about that? For me, just walk. You don't need to do any cardio at all, partly because some of the cardio can interfere, especially with those of us who are a little bit more advanced. You don't really need it. Rest periods between working sets, you want the rest. You do not want to go too fast. These are not metabolic conditioning workouts. You want to take 2-3 minutes between sets, except for those drop sets that we talked about. And this is how I would be doing this. Now, of course, this is one way to skin the cat. The recommendation that I'm giving you all, for those of you who are asking me, hey, Jade, I want to start a program this spring, build muscle, burn some fat. What should I be doing? This is what I recommend for body recompositioning. A lot of stuff that I covered here, but it's actually really simple, right? If I had to break this down into 3 things only: make sure you eat plenty of protein, up near your body weight in grams, in pounds, in grams of protein daily. 2, make sure you're getting 4 to 7. I think 5 is perfect for people who are more advanced, 3 to 4 for people who are more beginners. Resistance training workouts per day done in the way that I talked about. That's 3, or that's 2. 3 is walk. Walk like crazy. And walking is also just a catch-all phrase for recover, right? Take hot baths, hang out in the sauna. If you're going to build the muscle, you also need to recover. So make sure that you recover, and walking should be the cardio that you do. You don't want to necessarily do a whole lot of cardio. And I guarantee you're going to get great body recompositioning results if you follow this. The big mistakes people are going to make is too much fat in their diet, not enough protein, right? Not doing the right kind of resistance training. But really the big mistake here is going to be, the biggest one is going to probably be your protein intake is going to be what gets a lot of you. And then just get into the gym and get your resistance training right and walk. And this is what I would try for those of you who are wanting to get into the body recompositioning sort of side of things. All right, I'm going to end right there. You guys let me know how you do. I want to hear from you if you're going to try this out and use this particular protocol, or if you have any other questions about it, hit me up on DM, shoot me an email, support@jadeteta.com. Hope you enjoyed the podcast today, and I will see you next time.